So we're really fortunate to have a great panel that actually picks up a lot of the themes that we've been hitting all day, which is exploring the early parts of your career, but also local news, the changing nature of technology and media. And moderating this panel is a very old and dear friend of mine. No, a very dear friend of mine who I've known a long time. She is not very old. I am very old. We first met when she was an assistant at the company that I was working at, and now she is the general vice president of marketing strategy at Spectrum Networks, where she oversees a team of, I think, 160 people, which is crazy town. And she creates collaboration across Charter Communications for government affairs, Spectrum Reach, and a lot of other internal divisions. She's a very great person. And also, we ran into each other about a year ago almost, in Chelsea Piers, and she asked me, do you know any millennials who are interested in media and politics combined? And I said, well, I happen to have one who lives in my house. And she wound up meeting my daughter, Jenna, who is now working for her and on this panel. So without further ado, I introduce you to this panel and Alison Hellman.
Great, thanks so much. So I'm incredibly excited to be on stage with such talented women who are all very passionate about local news, as I hope you all will be after this panel. So just to ground us, I thought it would make sense to talk a little bit about the business. So we all work for Spectrum, which most of you guys would think of as a cable company. And it's really a connectivity company. And there's 27 million residential subscribers who get internet from us. And we also have a video business, which a lot of people think of as cable. And even if you guys are cord cutters or cord nevers, you likely get internet from a company like ours to stream Hulu or Netflix or any of the products that they just discussed. But we, this group specifically, work on the local news division. And from a business perspective, it provides value to the cable company because people watch a lot of local news, and we see that in the data. And the belief is because people watch so much of it, if it went away, people would discontinue using Spectrum. So that business reason allows us to do what we really love. And what we really love is fostering democracy through local news. So before we delve into why we're so passionate about it, we thought we'd play a video that's going to do a much better job than I would to describe what we do. So Matt, if you could play the video.
The only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. With your help, man will be what he was born to be.
Refreshing storytelling is about being different. When so much of the media landscape is about sensationalism and conflict, sometimes spotlighting solutions can be an extraordinary act. Every day, we aspire to a higher calling of local journalism. We want to empower our communities. We live here. We're from here. These are our cities, our neighbors. In an era of consolidation, being of the community is truly disrupting convention. And that's just the start. We're investing in new content, resources, and people. The forecast for tomorrow is inspiring. Spectrum News is leading the way and redefining journalism in the process.
Good morning from all of us here at Spectrum News. I'm Veronica. So good morning from all of us here at Spectrum News.
We're always local, always relevant, always on. We are Spectrum News.
I love that sizzle, so I like to play it as often as possible. So hopefully that illustrated that there's about 30 local news channels across the country. So if you're in New York, they're like New York 1 across the country. And we feel really blessed to be able to be in this place. But what I thought would be more interesting today was to talk a little bit about all of our career paths and how we got here. So I'm going to start with Jenna, and Evan started this off a little bit. But as Evan said, I have known Evan since my first job. And if you guys have been here all day, to know Evan is to adore him, to admire him, and to love him. And I hadn't seen him in a bit, and I ran into him at Chelsea Market. And I had been thinking for a bit about the gaps in my team. And I think when you're managing a team, you want to think about your strengths and your weaknesses very often. And I was thinking we really needed more specialists, and we needed people that really deeply cared about local politics. And as I ran into Evan, I told him I had had 2 children since I seen him last, and he told me that Jenna had graduated college. And we talked a little bit about what Jenna did. So I actually begged him to introduce me to Jenna. So Jenna, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yes. Well, first, it definitely helps, and I'm very lucky to have a dad that works in this business and has a very annoying but endearing habit of sort of like knowing what's best for you before you realize it yourself. So he very generously introduced me to Allie. But before I met Allie, I had graduated from college in Connecticut. I had worked for almost 2 years for Senator Chris Murphy on his re-election campaign, working to elect candidates up and down the ballot in Connecticut, which was just an amazing crash course in grassroots politics, in local politics, in state government, and sort of the way that this all impacts our lives so deeply on a day-to-day basis. And I was really committed to working on a campaign in 2020, so I was really only looking for sort of a part-time job. I was substitute teaching. I was a little hesitant to meet Allie because I didn't want to fall in love with anything that would take me away from 2020, but did go in to meet her, thankfully, and wound up just, I think the video really speaks to just the mission and vision that everyone at Spectrum shares of really strengthening democracy through local news and shining a light on, everything that's going on at the local level that, again, does have that really, really deep impact and that people aren't paying enough attention to, and that doesn't get the sort of same national focus that we have on the presidential race in 2020, the things that get overshadowed when there aren't sort of local journalists doing this work. So I was just sort of immediately drawn to the mission that Allie's team had, and really excited to work there.
Just to note, I kind of sold her, but then I brought Sammy in to close the deal, and that was really, really helpful. Lindsay, you had a very different career path. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I did. So I did a lot of journalism in college and decided that I wanted to be a journalist. And so I went to a small liberal arts school, so a lot of my journalism practice happened through internships and work on this student paper. And going into my senior year, I had this wonderful national internship where you get accepted into this cohort and they send you to New York for the summer, and then they assign you to one of the 20 big magazines. And at that point, I thought I wanted to write for the New Yorker and do these deep dives. And you rank which magazines you want to be at. So I'm like the New Yorker, Newsweek, all of the news ones. And I was assigned to Food and Wine, which was wonderful. My summer was amazing. I got a lot of free wine. But I went up to the editor-in-chief of Newsweek at one of the kind of events for this internship and said, I just want to know why I wasn't picked for your magazine. And what I could do. Really, my question was what I could do to, in the future, get picked for a job potentially at your magazine. And he said, go out and get some life experience. You don't want to be an assistant right out of college. You want to be actually doing something. Long story short, I applied to Teach for America, which was sort of at its height at that point. This was 2005. And so I got in, was accepted, moved to New York, taught for 2 years. And during that time, there was this transit strike. I don't know if any of you remember it. Maybe the older people in here remember. It was crazy. It was going to cripple the city. The MTA was shutting down all the buses. At that point, there was no Uber, so nobody could figure out how to get to work. I was a public school teacher who lived downtown, worked on 182nd Street. Bloomberg told us we all had to get to work as teachers, and I had to figure out how to get 180 blocks. And I turned on New York 1, and I'd never watched New York 1, and I watched it for 3 days straight leading into this strike. Anytime I wasn't at work, because we didn't know if it was going to happen or not, the negotiations, and I was just like, this is an incredible resource. I'm a few months out of college, new to New York, and what would I do without this? I need to figure out what is going to happen to me. And I fell in love with this station and its reporting, and the transit reporter at that point was Bobby Kuza, and it was critical information. And New York One actually broke the story that the strike was going to happen. And I remember at 2 a.m, I was still watching it because I was trying to figure out what was going to happen to public school teachers. And they gave us a 2-hour school delay, but told us we had to figure out how to get to our schools. And it was just an incredible resource. So flash forward a few years, I had gone to Columbia Journalism School. I was working for a website that covered New York City schools. It was 2009, and they lost all their funding because it was 2009, and they laid off the entire staff. They told us, I had been there for like 11 months, they said, we're going to have to lay you all off in about 2 months. So I had about a 2-month period to get a new job. And that night I went on Media Bistro, which I don't even know if it still is. As back then it was like the big thing for jobs. And I saw that New York One was looking for an education reporter. And at this point I taught for 2 years, my master's from PACE in teaching, through AmeriCorps, where all of these things are being shouted out. And I had my master's in journalism, I had a lot of debt, and I was no TV experience, totally unqualified. Long story short, after about 8-month application process, I since was laid off, went on unemployment. I convinced New York One to hire me. So I did that for 10 years. I was the education reporter. And then I was ready for a change after a decade. And I was ready, I thought, to think big picture. I was still so devoted to New York One and what we did and to local reporting. And I loved it. But I was ready, I think, to kind of think more strategically about it, rather than kind of the day-to-day storytelling that I loved so much. And I was kind of heartbroken to leave being a reporter, but I knew it was time. And Allie and I are friends, and we worked together, but not directly at that point. And I went into her office one day and said, help, you've had a great career. What should I do next? I'm thinking the next 10 years, the next 20 years, where this industry is. And we talked for a while. We talked about just generally what I might want to do. And then she was like, we have things here. And I ended up moving over to the digital side, and I'm now executive producer of digital for New York One, which is wonderful.
And she's doing an awesome job, as you might imagine. And Sammy, when I think about people that have a passion for their job, you would be the person I think about most. And watching Sammy and her career has been one of the joys of my job. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you do and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, so if you were to track from where I started to where I am now, it's not at all linear. It's actually pretty nauseating. I started at a government affairs firm, so I worked for 2 lobbyists. I covered congressional hearings, I got to summarize them for our clients, and then 2016 happened, and something happened in that year, I think we all know. And the environment in DC, which was where I worked, was a little overwhelming for me, so I had to listen to myself, and I moved home. At that point, I was going on informational interviews or maybe real interviews and, interviewed for something I was wildly underqualified for, which was really discouraging, but then wound up in Allie's office for an informational interview. This was at a point when you were building out your team. And there were like 5 different groups, but you thought that, based on our conversation, I would be best suited for audience insights, which is research, which was what the past panel was just talking about. I avoided math throughout college. So after 8 months in that group, we decided it wasn't the best path for me. And, we've talked a lot today about being flexible. So then I transitioned to working for Katie Lombardi, who spoke earlier today. She's our VP of Digital, and I learned a lot about the content and product strategy side of our products. And I've always kind of worked with Allie on random projects, but I think it got to a point where the company was trying to identify what our greatest opportunities were. And one of those was covering local politics. There's so much conversation happening on the national level. There's silence at the local and state levels. So that's when my education, poli-sci, and legal studies finally made sense. And I started working on our Decision 2020-2019 coverage.
Great. So I think one of the reasons I love my job, and I really do love my job so much, is that we're constantly questioning the norm and we're constantly innovating. And this group really knows my deep belief here, probably to nauseam, that, and this was discussed earlier, to innovate, you really need to understand your audience. And that's a cycle that goes on forever, right? And to connect to your audience, you need to constantly learn from them, to talk to them, and change course. So, Lindsay, Lindsay has done this incredible job of writing these weekly emails to all of the journalists at New York One and teaching them a bit about what's working and what's not from a data point perspective, but also from a learning perspective. They're some of my favorite emails of the week. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you've learned and how we're innovating based on that learning?
Sure. So New York One was really late to digital. And when I was a reporter there 8-9 years ago, I was frustrated by that even then. And frustrated that the management back then really saw us, we're owned by the cable company, we do TV news, and there was no vision for that ever broadening. And so they just ignored it. And reporters sort of individually found their way to things like Twitter, but it was haphazard, it was disorganized, there was no strategy behind it. Quite frankly, there's no training around it, so it's kind of dangerous when you're not guiding people. And it's been a huge change in the last few years with Ali and Katie's team coming in and really putting a lot of structure and thought around this. And one of the amazing things about digital is that we have so much data. I mean, we have a lot of data on the TV side as well. One of the benefits of being owned by the cable company. But that, shockingly, wasn't even really looked at many years ago, even though we had it. So now, with all of this data, the people kind of doing the journalism day to day, the reporters, they don't have time to really pour through it and think about it. So it's a big part of my job is to kind of monitor all of that and to figure out what we should learn from it. As Ali said, we don't want to just, data for data's sake is useless and also could be problematic. If you look at our top read stories in a week on our website, a bunch of them might be kind of gruesome crime stories. But that's not New York One's strategy to lead with crime and to overemphasize crime. That's some other local television's strategy, local television news stations. It's never been ours. It is what people sometimes will click on, but within those top articles, you can also see some really amazing trends and some really good reporting we've done. And so emphasizing that to the newsroom and saying, if we do this political explainer in a wonderful, rich way, 9,000 people will read it on a day before, a small election in Brooklyn where only 12,000 people are voting. So we can assume that we're the only ones covering this. And so a ton of the people walking in to vote that day found their way to our information, and they were desperately looking for it because we can see they found it through Google. So they were searching for this. We were the only ones that had it, and the majority of the voters in that tiny election were on our website in the days leading up to it. And that is really valuable. It encourages our newsroom to keep producing that kind of journalism. Everybody who works, for local journalism in general is pretty mission driven. And so we can provide them with the encouragement, but also kind of the nudging of do more of this. Do less of this, do more of this. People want this. Your stuff's being read. And it's really satisfying.
Just a quick plug, I think you can all probably tell that we're all very passionate about local politics. If you are a registered voter in New York City, there is an election on Tuesday that you can vote in. And as Lindsay mentioned, all of our sort of 2019 election coverage on New York One, we had early voting in New York State for the first time this year, and I think a third of the voters who had voted in the first 3 days had looked at our election coverage. So exactly what you were saying, that it really makes a deep impact.
Yeah. And then Sammy, you're innovating in a different area around what we're calling Decision 2020. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the gap that I mentioned before in the local state political landscape is not as sexy as what's happening nationally, or controversial, or, in front of your face. So I think it's our responsibility to figure out how to find ways to make that information interesting to my friends and me and people who are younger than I am. I never watched local news growing up. I wish that I had known then how important it was, because I would have studied more or been more informed about it, and actually known the names of my city council people. So we have recently launched a digital series called Know Your Electeds, and our hope with it is to kind of humanize as well as introduce the folks on the local and state level who represent you, who have a much more direct impact on your daily life than the folks at the federal level do. And just an interesting note about the franchise, we ask them similar questions, and you'll see that throughout, but we ask them, what is one thing you wish your constituents knew about you that you don't think they know? And a ton of them say that I don't work in DC. So with that said, I think we have a
Can we play the next video, please?
My name is Dan Flynn. I represent House District 2.
I'm Ventress Driscoll. I represent Florida House District 63.
I'm Drew Springer.
Sean O'Brien.
Vernon Sykes.
Representing the 101st District.
12th Senate District.
District 45.
This is a job that gives me an opportunity to make a difference.
I've spent my entire life in my district, and I have those deep roots there.
Getting the opportunity every day to represent my neighborhood, the community that raised me, is just a humbling thing.
I'm really good at folding sweaters.
We're selling 47,000 hot dogs a week.
Big Lady Gaga fan.
I'm a basketball junkie.
Cleveland Browns, Cleveland Indians. We're back, baby. We're back.
I love connecting with the people. That's the whole reason why we're here. We live to serve the community.
It's an honor and a privilege to represent people who have a big heart.
You have to be fearless and you have to be diligent.
It's not the government, it is our government. It belongs to the people.
So that, how many people have we interviewed so far around?
Interviewed around 50 people from 3 states, but we're gonna have about 100.
It's 150.
So it's a great example between Jenna and Sammy just constantly talking to me about how important this is, and that whole program they built from the scratch. They did everything they needed to do for this. And it was their passion that got us here, and it was something that that video I showed at our senior management meeting for charter, and they've done incredible work on that.
Can I just say 2 more things? One,
yes.
I think, sorry, again, very passionate about this whole project, but I think so much of the work that these state representatives and state senators and city council people do is eclipsed, as we've talked about, by the national conversation. And we had an amazing panel earlier about 2020 and the presidency, which is of course crucial, but I think people overlook, again, these races that are happening in 2020 and the fact that these folks are the ones that in 2020 are going to be giving money or not giving money to things like the 2020 census, which will then impact, our legislative districts for the next decade. So the people we're electing at the state level are really the ones who are going to shape politics and the future of our democracy for the next 10 years at minimum. And so when we don't sort of pay attention to what these people are doing, we lose out on, having a say in how that process is going to go, not just in the next 2 years for 2020, but really in the next 10 years. And I think it also speaks to what Allie said, just letting Sammy and I take this passion and turn it into this project that we've gotten to travel to, Nashville and Albany and Orlando and San Antonio to film these interviews, and having that really incredible opportunity to meet these representatives, especially as, young professionals who are just starting our careers, has been a really amazing opportunity at Spectrum as well.
Great. So I think the day is ending soon, so I thought I would just do one last round of questions, then you guys could ask questions. But can you guys all give some advice for the room about how to get these jobs that you guys feel so passionate about?
So one thing I would say is that if you are an ambitious person wanting to get into the news or general media landscape, there's a lot of room in local news right now because it's been so gutted nationally. That's where a lot of the really good stories are hiding. I mean, we see these kind of national fights over little scraps of new information, and somebody will tweet it and then everybody will be covering it in 3 seconds. And there is the next Pulitzer Prize winning story is in some state house in the Midwest that there's no reporter assigned to right now. And if you can figure out a way of building a company or being that reporter that can be there, then you don't have any competition anymore. I mean, it's very depressing, but if it's also a great opportunity as a younger person to kind of rebuild what has been lost. And those stories are it's the next Flint water crisis is being not uncovered because there's no reporters and no news business in that part of the world. So this is the kind of thing that we think about all the time and try to come up with solutions for, but there's a lot of room for a lot more people to be thinking about it and to be coming up with smart solutions.
Yeah, I think state house reporting and things like Report for America are 2 huge areas of opportunity. And I guess my advice, I would also give some very specific advice that I think has helped me a lot get internships. And I've only had 2 jobs since graduating from college, but my first job is, reach out to people in your network when you don't need something from them. I think there's nothing worse than hearing from someone you're connected to for the first time in years and they're asking you for something, whether it's a job or an internship. So I think maintaining relationships, investing in relationships, reaching out to someone when you see an article that they might be interested in or when you read about something they're doing, and just really making those connections with people can go a long way when it does come time for you to ask them for something like a job.
My advice is to always be curious, but I don't mean if you're a physicist you have to start reading English Lit every night. But if you're working on a project and your boss or colleague says something you don't understand, stop them and ask the question, because you'll make your team stronger and your product better at the end of the day, as well as yourself. Also, I always say yes. So sometimes you get big projects that are very fulfilling and are very meaningful to you, whatever your drive is or purpose is. And then you get smaller tasks that are sometimes frustrating. But say yes to all of them, because they expose you to all different parts of the business, all different kinds of people and work ethics and jargon. So always be curious and always say yes.
Okay, great. And let us know if you guys have any questions.
You all are so nurturing and visionary, and restoring the idea of community is the only thing I believe that's going to save this country, and I think it's serious. And I love that you are so feminine about this, and it's just great. So my question is, where else do you have channels, networks? What other cities are you in?
Yeah, so we actually have a lot.
So list them all.
I will list them all, miss them, so help me out. So we have one in New York, one obviously. We have one in Albany. We have one upstate in Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo. We have 2 in Florida, Orlando and Tampa. We have 2 in Texas, Austin and San Antonio. We have some in Hawaii. We have one in LA,
Kentucky.
North Carolina. We have 3 channels, and then we have statewide products in Kentucky, Ohio, Wisconsin. And what have I missed?
But nothing in Virginia or Maryland.
DC. Oh, we have a DC bureau in DC.
Oh, no.
Oh, Massachusetts. Of course, I missed that. Sorry.
And can we find both videos were beautiful, but the video you showed initially, the one on democracy, is that online?
We will make it online. We'll figure out a way to get it online.
Will you really?
Great. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, I just wanted to say, and also ask first, I think it would be an injustice not to note that all of you brilliant and strong women up on this stage are in fact women. Like, you all are women on this team. Like, that is so incredible and also so inspiring as a woman who is also
and Katie, who spoke earlier, is on our team. So
and yes, awesome. That is incredible. Also, hello. So I was just wondering if there's anything that you all could speak to that I don't know, anything that you could share if you feel this sentiment, or if you ever were met with opposition or anything really that you think young, like aspiring, especially female writers, journalists should hear?
I can think about when I first started as a reporter, I was really underestimated. And people would tell me this too, and I don't want to say I used it to my advantage, but I let people underestimate me and then just quietly stood back there and paid attention. So I was the education reporter for 10 years, and especially in the first few years, I broke a bunch of big stories because people didn't think that I was a threat. And it's very annoying, but it's also then just so much more satisfying when you shock them. So I would say that if you ever do feel like you're being underestimated, just think about how sweet it's going to feel when they realize that they are wrong. And there's lots of ways to deal with being underestimated, but that's one of them that I've found particularly satisfying.
Yeah, and I would say I think I came from the politics and campaign world where I worked for a very lovely team and had an amazing boss, but is very much still like a boys' club and has that atmosphere. And interviewing with Allie and seeing that she did have a really female-led staff and team and a diverse team was really refreshing and made me, I think it's good to think about who you want to work for and what values they have. And I could tell just from meeting Allie once that she was the type of person and led the type of team that I wanted to be a part of and that shared those values.
I think you used the word passion before, but sometimes it's intensity for me. And as a woman in a room often with just men, that isn't always perceived the best way. So what I've been working on personally is just delivering information that I feel passionately about in a lovely way. You can always be lovely about it. It doesn't make you female or male. You can just be kind about it, and that'll get you through.
I'm also a parent, and I don't hide that at work. And Allie's a parent. We had kids around the same time, and we're both pregnant at work. And it's something that we talk about, our family lives. And there's people who work in our same office who have told me they're like 10, 20 years ago, we never would have talked about, especially as a woman, that our children at work. I mean, I have photos of them all over my desk, you do too. It's something that we're kind of open about, and I feel very strongly of changing that broader culture that it has to kind of start with you. And I think normalizing it is just something we do every day.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's basic, but it's like you are who you are, and fighting it is so exhausting, right? You know, and so I think at a certain point in your life, you realize, like, this is who I am, and if people don't like me, too bad. And really finding a boss that understands you is so important. And we are all women here, but I have a male boss, a white male boss, who's older, who is the sweetest, kindest, most empathetic man in the world, who, when we first talked about the job, my first response to him was, oh, I got to get pregnant soon again. And he said, awesome. And so you want to look for those people, and it's not always women. I just want to note that. And you want to work for those people. Any other questions?
Hi. I just have a question about coast to coast. We're seeing newspapers shut down. We're seeing magazines closed, television in this area in particular. Like, I know Verizon just brought on New York One as their, and FiOS News is, I don't know, defunct as of like next week or something to that effect. My question is surrounding like the importance of multiple voices for the local news industry in general, just as an overall, what you think the importance is to have those multiple voices, because it seems like a lot is going away and we're only seeing like maybe one or two in areas being brought to the forefront.
Yeah, so I think the crisis in local news, right, and it was obviously brought on, I don't think on purpose, right, but it's from digital media, mm-hmm. right, and so there's scale, and then you could buy media on Facebook and Google, et cetera, right, and local news is local, right, so it's really hard to make money and sustain. We wouldn't work without being part of a cable company. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't be a standalone business. So we have different revenue streams, right? So that's what has allowed us. But I think we're in a real crisis, right? And I don't know the solution. I wish we did, and we think about this constantly. But what we're committed to is providing news and information, unbiased news and information. If we want to partner with other people so we have more voices, we're happy to do that too. But we want to stay true to our mission, and that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you.
And selling that mission, talking about how, and selling it, I mean, Allie has, part of your job is to sell it to remind the cable company why, this is important. And I think that selling it to the wider public, like, this is important. People need to recognize that, invest in it, whether that's subscribing to their local paper or being aware that, that investors in some cases are taking hits on local journalism and celebrating that as a good thing versus companies coming in and carving them up and letting them die. And so I think that the awareness, and we're finally there, it's maybe too late in some markets, so many places have died, they're going to have to be rebuilt, but I think there is an awareness now about it.
Hopefully we'll be rebuilding that. That's our goal.
Thank you.
Hi, I was just wondering how you guys are kind of facing the challenge of like how we see news now. Like, I just go on Twitter, I see what's trending, I check my weather real quick. Like, how are you guys facing that challenge of the quick news?
So the quick news part of it?
Right. Like
how do we
people are consuming like news content?
Yeah. Again, we think about this all the time too, and how to reach people who are just checking Twitter or checking Facebook. So the way that I'm really approaching it right now as executive producer of digital at New York One is convincing all of our reporters and managers and editors and assignment editors that if we have a good story, so if we have this great investigation into Rikers Island, that the story shouldn't begin and end with the 2-minute TV story, that we should give that reporter and that editor and that assignment or that photographer an extra day or two, and then make that story in 6 different ways. We should make a Twitter version of it, which might be a tweet thread with some photos and shorter clips. We should make an Instagram stories version of it that will take hours to create if we're going to do it right, but we'll tell a narrative in 10 frames. With a mix of, stickers and polls and short clips of video and text on all of it. We should make a Facebook version of that story. And we have different audiences on all of these platforms. And I want to reach them with our local news. And I want them to then say to someone 3 days later, oh, I learned about that from New York One. And not even necessarily conscious of that they learned about it on Instagram stories from New York One, but they learned about it from New York One. And then we start to build a relationship with them. And when they do hear 40 sirens going off, they know to type into their phone newyork1.com to see what's happening. And we will eventually have kind of as deep a relationship with people like you as we do with people who have a cable TV subscription and turn on their TV to us every day.
And I think it goes back to what you were saying, Allie, about understanding your audience, so constantly evolving your understanding. So as it pertains to social media, why are consumers going on social media? For what information are they looking? How long are they staying on? And then figuring out how we can tailor our content to keep people within our ecosystem of profiles or platforms, whatever you want to call them. So I think it does also have a lot to do with continuing to keep a pulse on who your audience is, what they're consuming, and for how long.
Thank you. The New York One Instagram story about closing Rikers Island and the city council vote on that was some of the most comprehensive and in-depth reporting about that story in all the city outlets. So I think that speaks to that as well.
Great. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.